Jeremy, it's been 40 years since you've been in Parliament. You came in 1983. I want to start at the beginning there. What made you want to stand for Parliament?
Well, I never set out in life to stand for Parliament. And indeed, my mother warned me against it.
Why was that?
She said there's a lot of very strange and very peculiar people in Parliament. You don't want to be mixed up with all of them.
Was she right?
She was a very wise woman. I had been very active in unions and the Labour Party, and I was a councillor in Haringey. Islington North was looking for a Labour candidate because the previous MP, Michael O'Halloran, had gone to the SDP. We had this tortuous selection process, and eventually it was a delegate structure. I was selected by 39 votes to 35 on the 6th ballot.
Well, so quite close.
Very close, yeah.
Did you expect to win?
At the end, I had no idea whether we could win or not. You could either get knocked out on the 3rd ballot or get through to the last one and win. And I did get through to the last one and eventually won it.
Was there a clear political division at the time between you and your opponent?
There was some, but the party as a whole was moving very much towards the left. Michael Foot was the leader at that time. There was a general agreement on a non-nuclear defence policy and issues of redistribution of power and wealth. It was a time of a great deal of community activity as well, which I saw myself as absolutely part of. And so that was a very strong message that I put forward, and that chimed with the atmosphere in Islington at that time, and I have to say, still is.
You won your seat, but Labour went down in flames, didn't they, in 83? Why do you think that was?
Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, had presented herself as the victorious leader over the Falklands War, and was promoting privatisation and the sale of council houses, which I think it was Dave Nellis described as selling £10 notes for a fiver. There was this development of the individualism, the Me Tooism type society that she was so keen on. The Labour campaign was under the cosh from the media in a way that I've seen since as well in my own circumstances. And it was quite hard to break past that. Now, my only campaigning in that election was in Islington North, so I wasn't campaigning anywhere else. But also the demolition job that was done on Michael Foot was extraordinary. It was just the levels of abuse that he received. Now, actually, Michael Foot had supported the Falklands War, but he was still pilloried as partly for his age, but also for his political views and his own record, which actually was a very creditable one.
Did you ever think, in these 40 years, what am I doing here in Parliament? Wouldn't I be more effective back in a movement, back in the trade union movement? You know, is this the best use of my time and skills and ideology?
Not really. Obviously, there are times when there's immense levels of frustration about Parliament and parliamentary processes. There's also the responsibility of working with and for and representing the people in the constituency, many of whom are very much up against it, very poor housing conditions, and all the issues of poverty. So I feel a responsibility to represent that community. I'm somebody that enjoys the company of people. I enjoy talking to them. I enjoy walking about the area, listening to people, and the endless lessons you learn. I think the problem with a lot of elected politicians is that they think they've been elected and they're a bit above everybody else. You're not. You just happen to be elected to a position. It's a responsibility to carry it out.
84, 85, the miners go down to defeat. It must have been clear by that stage that the left was not in the ascendant. Yeah. How does that feel, particularly after 87, when there's a concerted turn, ditch nuclear disarmament, the red rose, not the red flag, a reorientation?
Actually, it was the start of New Labour, but really. Just go back a second to the miners' strike, because it was very significant. Could the miners have won? Yeah, they could have won. What happened? The support was often tokenistic. There was no serious industrial action in support of the miners, other than brief interludes at times when some people refused to cross picket lines and things like that. But basically, the support was not of a meaningful type. And the way in which the cynicism of Parliament about the miners is something that I found quite shocking. Tony Benn and I would go off on a picket line first thing in the morning, spend the day doing events with the miners, often travelling quite a lot. Get back to Parliament in the evening. In those days, votes were normally at 10 o'clock at night, so you'd get back there about 9. Labour MPs said, the problem with the miners is Scargill doesn't know what he's doing. They don't know what they're doing. It was like the whole thing could be settled if there was a different person leading the NUM and so on. It couldn't be. Thatcher was after the miners' union. So defeat of the miners in 85 was highly significant. 87 election was presented as a step forward, and it was. We gained some seats. The vote increased. In my own case, the majority went up massively. But it was then the start of a move when Kinnock brought in Aims and Values document. Aims and Values did move the party away from a lot of the socialist views that were put forward in the previous election manifestos. And so that was a point of huge debate, locally as well as elsewhere. It was also a time when Thatcher was busy attacking the Great London Council and the metropolitan counties, and a big attack on local government. And the left were very strong in local government. So there was a lot going on there, and it was a quite intense time within the Labour Party.
And to those who say, well, the rationale for this is, we've lost 3 times. We have to do something differently. We can't afford to be in opposition anymore. This is what we have to do in order to win again. What do you say to them?
There comes a point when you trim so much, you look like the other side, and all you're offering is a different image. And I do think it is a issue of campaigning and the reality of people's lives, and can we change them? Can we improve people's lives through political action? Yes, providing it's accompanied by all the other kinds of actions in our society. I felt that very strongly. It's very much what I feel at the moment, that we have to offer some fundamental change. We live in a deeply unequal society. The advances made in post-war Britain were essentially National Health Service, were the welfare state, housing and so on. All of that was rolled back by Thatcher, who was the most ideological prime minister this country has ever had, and very determined with it. In a sense, what the 87 onwards changes in the Labour Party were about, which then continued a great deal under Blair from 93 onwards, 94 onwards, were essentially a compromise with Thatcher.
Did you ever think at some time during those 40 years, yeah, I don't know if this is the party for me anymore? I joined a party that believed in C&D. Now I'm in a party that's bombing Iraq.
I joined the party in 1966. I actually didn't agree, even then, with Wilson over his political support for the US in Vietnam. And that was a figure of debate within the party. So there was always a point of debate and disagreement within the party. But I recognised the Labour Party was a creation of socialist ideals, community ideals, trade unions, and political organisation. And you had to try and work within it. But the Labour Party has to be inclusive in order to do that. And there's a tendency by some of our leaders to move away from inclusivity and start trying to rule by expelling people they don't like. That is not a good way to go.
So at no time did you think, you know what, this isn't the party for me?
I felt very angry and I felt very alienated at many, many times, particularly much later on over the Iraq war. I mean, I was so angry at the dishonesty of it, the way in which it'd gone about, and all the horrors that went with it. Did I think? Yeah, of course I did. But I decided I would stay and fight.
I want to talk a little bit about your campaigning over kind of foreign affairs. Anti-apartheid, Kurdistan, Palestine are all issues that you have embraced. Just tell us a bit about how you came to those issues and how you understood your role in them.
I've always been fascinated by the globe, what we live in, the world we live in. Now, I grew up in a small town in Shropshire. The subject I enjoyed most in the school was history and geography and literature. I like reading very widely. I was academically monumentally unsuccessful in school, by the way, and I was informed by the head teacher on my departure that I would never make anything of my life because I was too awkward. I couldn't get into college or university, and I didn't really want to anyway. And so I saw this leaflet for voluntary service overseas, filled in the form, got invited for an interview, and to my astonishment was offered a place. I didn't think I would be. And I was then asked to go to Jamaica, where I was a volunteer teacher, youth worker. And I also began to learn quite a lot about Caribbean and African history from that. And then after I left there, I went off around South America on my own and learnt a great deal, about the places I went to, but also a lot about yourself and your own abilities to survive and understand people, and also quite a lot about the kindness of strangers. So, and the kindness of strangers is something we all need from time to time. So that gave me this interest in the world as a whole. Probably I got a lot of it from my parents without realizing it. They had met in solidarity with the Spanish Republic in 1930s. And my mum was active in the anti-fascist movement in the 1930s. So I probably picked up quite a lot from them without really realising it. Kurdistan, human rights in Turkey and so on, partly because of the constituency issues surrounding it. Palestine, partly for the same reasons, partly because of the sheer injustice of the way that they have been treated. And apartheid, because I just remember the day of Sharpeville shooting in 1960. My mother was deeply stressed by this. I was only, 11 or 12 then. She was deeply distressed by this. And then the ANC made the call for boycott. And she said, there's no South African goods ever coming in this house again until apartheid's over. She was quite severe about that, very, rightly so. And so I was involved, and then I was involved in the Stop the 70 tour, when the apartheid cricket tour was supposed to come and didn't. The apartheid rugby team did come. And then we had the incident at South Africa House. Now, there was an announcement by Citigroup Anti-Apartheid, which was not affiliated to the anti-apartheid movement, to have this 24-hour non-stop picket. I went along there on the appropriate day it was due to start with Stuart Holland and Tony Banks. We expected to be arrested if we went in front of South Africa House, and there's that picture of me duly being arrested. And I was, and we were all taken to a police station and held for a while. The officer came to charge me. I was taken into the charge room, and he said, I'm going to now charge you. So I was assuming I'd be charged with obstruction or something, And he said, I'm going to charge you under the Diplomatic Immunities Act. I said, what? I said, sorry, what did you say? He said, and he read it out, the Diplomatic Immunities Act. So, sorry, what are you talking about? He said, you behaved in a way that was offensive to a foreign diplomatic mission. So what do you say to that? I said, well, I came here to be offensive to them. So he said, that's guilty. And I said, oh no, not guilty. My moral right to demonstrate. So anyway, the case went to court, and we won. We all won. And we won on our moral right, and we won on the right to demonstrate and picket, and the non-stop picket lasted. Did it end apartheid? No. Lots of things ended apartheid. What really ended apartheid was the bravery of people in Soweto, in the unions, the miners, and so many others in South Africa. Our solidarity, I hope, gave them courage and gave them some degree of comfort that there were people, even in Britain, who were serious about supporting them. But did the boycott and all that end apartheid? No. It was the bravery of people in South Africa.
So a significant portion of your life, political life and parliamentary life, you've dedicated to anti-racism. Two questions here. But first of all, what motivated you to do that?
Racism is an evil. It destroys people's lives. In the case of South Africa, it was a systematic scientific racism which was designed to denigrate and destroy the lives of any active black person, and to also separate through racial stratification, Asians, Cape Coloured and so on. Racism against the Jewish people in Nazi Germany, which built on centuries of anti-Semitism, ended up with the gas chambers and the Holocaust, as it did also for the Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities and lesbian and gay communities as well. Racism is an utterly evil thing. But I grew up in England in the 1950s and 60s when racism was racist remarks, which are now would be appalling, were just the normal conversation. They happened all the time. Then the Labour government of 64 then introduced the Race Relations Act, promoted by Paul Stevenson after the Bristol bus boycott. My peer group in my school were not particularly radical, and they say, well, you can't make racism illegal. It's natural, isn't it? Well, that's what they actually said that. And so I would be the one arguing against this all the time. And it did promote that kind of debate. But we also then had Enoch Powell and all that. And I lived in the Midlands, remember. And Enoch Powell was promoting his racial superiority stuff. And that had a big effect on the politics of the region. So there was no place to go other than one of solidarity. And so in Shropshire, when I was back from the Caribbean, we formed the Shropshire Campaign Against Racism, SCAR, and worked with the Indian Workers Association, that was a big community there, fighting against racism in any form, and against the 1971 Immigration Act, which brought in the concept of patriality, which in a sense was basically saying if you're from the white Commonwealth you can come and live here, but if you're from the black Commonwealth you can't. That's what it was really about. And so all my life has been campaigning on these issues, and it's never going to stop.
So my second question is, given that, how do you make sense of the persistent accusations of anti-Semitism that came your way during your tenure as leader of the Labour Party?
Well, the accusation is monstrous, wrong, and appalling. And I've made that very, very clear all through, that any form of racism is wrong and unacceptable in any way. And when I became the leader of the party, there were reports of some anti-Semitic behaviour within the party. I then asked what the process was for dealing with this. Answer was there none. There was no process. There was no proper investigation process. The Labour Party was way behind the curve on that and on other forms of racism within the party, and still is. So it's got to change in those respects. And so I tried to bring in a system which would independently examine allegations and accusations that were made. Because when I became a leader, I get a phone call saying, what should we do over this case? I said, why are you asking me? I don't know the details of it. I don't know the individuals concerned. How can I make a decision? The whole culture in the party was the assumption that every decision made by the leadership of the party would be on political considerations alone. And I said, this is nonsense. We cannot do this. We'd been through all this in local government when I remember working with Bernie and Diane and many others on trying to bring in race awareness and all the rest of it in local government employment attitudes. So the Labour Party was just way behind the curve on all of this. And I was then accused of being somehow or other tolerant of anti-Semitism. Absolutely not. I don't tolerate any form of racism whatsoever. When an accusation is made, deal with it, investigate it, and take action. But make sure it's accurate, and make sure it's genuine, and make sure it's correct. We had a very hard time with the constant media stream and accusations that were made against me, and the currency that some people who should know better gave to these monstrous accusations.
Let's talk about you becoming leader, because I got a sense, I've interviewed you before, and I've got a sense that the whole thing took you entirely by surprise.
We had a meeting of the Socialist Campaign Group, which was not a huge organisation at that time, in 2015, after the 2015 election. We were offering austerity, cuts, and a continuation of a wage freeze. Not very surprising that a lot of working class communities weren't very excited by this. I said, look, this is a time when the party has got to actually face some kind of political debate and some kind of political challenge. We should put up a candidate. Most said, oh, we'll never get the nominations, we can't do it, there's no point, you know, we'll stay around and fight for the policies in the future. I said, well, no, you're missing the point, you're missing a chance. You've really got to put up a candidate. John said he wouldn't do it, John Mack, because he'd already done it. Diane said she's not doing that again. So they started looking at me and said, you've got to do it. So I said, okay. And at that point, Diane's hand went like that. And she'd already got a tweet ready to say I was standing as a candidate, and had sent it out within 5 seconds of me saying I would do it. And so that was then a big story. We then had this huge campaign to get sufficient nominations, which was done by a lot of grassroots campaigning, social media presence, particularly Ben Sellers and other people put huge effort into that, and we ended up getting the necessary 35 nominations. We got 36 actually, because one we didn't know had come in by email, with a minute to go. Our campaign was based on mobilising people in rallies all over the country, which we had a very large number of. I did about 100 events until we finally got to the result when we won it. What I felt at the end of it was that we'd had this amazing victory, but then the reality of the Labour Party structure, bureaucracy, and the Parliamentary Labour Party hit me very, very hard straight away. I had to appoint a shadow cabinet. There weren't enough allies to fill even half the shadow cabinet. There were basically 15 people in the PLP that really supported me at that time. And so I wrote in my diary, it's like being at the top of the beach, but unfortunately all the supporters are still out at sea. So it was a very, very difficult time, and the undermining which started straight away. Basically, the Parliamentary Labour Party didn't like the idea that the party members had elected somebody that they didn't want. We had the mass resignations the following year in 2016, and that started a second leadership campaign. And so within 9 months of being elected leader, we'd had the problems in the shadow cabinet, we'd had the mass resignations, we'd had local elections, European referendum campaign, and then another leadership campaign in the summer of 2016. And we won that with a bigger majority. It wasn't easy, and the party bureaucracy as a whole were very unkeen, often extremely uncooperative, and making changes from the top is never easy. And it also, my whole approach is one of democracy, accountability and inclusion and activism of people rather than being a dictator. Now I get quite a lot of criticism from friends who say, well, you should have become a dictator, got rid of X, Y, Z, da, 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 da. Yeah, maybe. But at the end of the day, you're just another person who gets rid of other people. You'll be replaced by somebody who does the same in the other direction. I wanted to build a movement. And in many ways we did. We achieved party membership of the largest ever, 600,000 by the end of it. So it was that growing movement.
So I want to talk to you about these two elections, because I feel like there's one group of people that only want to talk about one election, 2019. There you go, told you, it was going to be awful. Look at that, they failed. And there's another group of people that want to talk about just 2017 and say, look, see what we can do. but there were two, and so I want to go through them one by one and then go to the whole. So 2017. How do you explain that? Did you see it coming? What do you think? What do you think happened?
Somebody had said at a meeting of the parliamentary committee, you know, May could call an election at any time, and I said, really? Why would she do that? And they said, well, you know, she might decide that's the best way out of her problems over Europe, to call an election, and that will give her a mandate. I don't think any people really thought it was going to happen. And then this rumour comes out in the office when I get there on a Tuesday morning, saying that, I think it was a Tuesday, saying the Prime Minister is making a statement this morning. We didn't know what it was. We hadn't had any warning of it. And so we looked at the pictures on the television of the rostrum she was using and worked out it wasn't a state occasion, it was a political occasion. There's two rostrums. So we then thought, well, maybe she's going to call an election. So we, in a sense, we'd worked it out about an hour before she made the statement. But obviously we weren't sure about that, and they certainly weren't giving us anything. The election was duly announced. We then had a very intensive few hours, which were, in a sense, a little microcosm of everything that goes on. There was intense activity and loyalty from my immediate team in the leader's office, fantastic. I called everybody together and said, right, this is on, we're going out to win, we're going to fight this, we're going to do everything, we're going to put out all the radical ideas we've got, we're going to mobilise people on this. I walked then through Parliament to go somewhere else and was taken on one side by a number of quite right-wing Labour MPs and told to resign straight away. I said, well, thanks for your support. Good luck in the election. and walked on. We were then on 24% in the polls. Somebody said, look, we need to get out on the street straight away. And I said, couldn't agree more. So they said, let's have a rally this afternoon in Croydon. I said, well, you can't just say we're having a rally. And they said, no, we do it at 4 o'clock. I said, well, it's 1 o'clock now. They said, yeah, we'll do it this afternoon. Just go down there. So I said, are you sure you know what you're doing? They said, yeah, it's going to be fine. Don't worry, just come. We'll go on the train and we'll go down there. All right. So we went to Croydon, and they'd been sending out text messages and emails. There was hundreds and hundreds of people there straight away for a street rally at 3 hours' notice. And everywhere we went, the rallies got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the support began to grow. And once the short period of the campaign had kicked in, broadcasting rules kick in, so we then got a fair hearing for the first time. I was extremely annoyed about the leak, really angry. I got home about 11:30 at night, and Seamus Milne comes on the phone and said, comrade, bad news. I said, oh, what bad news? He said, somebody's got the manifesto. I said, what? But then next morning, I get up, turn on my phone, all these messages saying, congratulations on this brilliant manifesto. It wasn't the final word anyway, but it got the word out there about public ownership and so on. So the campaign grew from the policy basis, and that was the fantastic thing about it. But what I didn't know was that there was a whole lot of people in the party that were not signed up to what we were doing, were not signed up to the campaign, were running a parallel campaign at Erdogan House, that there was money being put in another direction from where it should have been going. And I was being advised by people in our head office, oh, this election is unwinnable, you've got to change a strategy, you've got to go on a defensive strategy, and we'll see if we survive. So I said, well, that's not what I'm picking up. I said, well, it's just your friends that come to rallies. Maybe, but I seem to have a lot of them. And so I refused to change the strategy and said, no, we're going out to gain seats and win. We were damaged, obviously everybody was, by the Manchester bomb. It was a grotesque and vile thing that happened there. We did lose campaigning time. Theresa May wanted to continue the suspension of campaigning almost indefinitely, I think. So we had an argument over the phone, Theresa May and I did, because I'd contacted all the other party leaders and they all agreed that we should resume campaigning. And so she said, no, we've got to stay. I said, look, I'm sorry, I'm not discussing this any longer. We are resuming campaigning as of this evening. And she was probably very annoyed about that, but then put out a statement saying we'd agreed to resume campaigning. But then I resumed it by making a statement about the causes of terrorism.
Did anybody in your team suggest you didn't do that?
Just about everybody. Most said it was a very bad idea, a big mistake, and it would ruin the progress we were clearly making in the campaign. I said, no, as a country, we've got to address this issue. Wars have consequences. Initially, the media got onto it and it was slammed by everybody. And then YouGov did a telephone poll which came out a bit later, which said something like 60% of the population thought what I was saying was thoughtful and on the right lines. And after that, nobody criticised it at all. And it meant we could get a hearing on the whole issues that I wanted to address of foreign policy. Some would say it was foolhardy. I don't think so. I think it was important to reflect on it. I had been to Manchester. I had talked to people there. And I had talked to them as victims as well.
So when the clock strikes 10, did you think, I knew it? Or did you think, oh my God, I got away with it? What were you thinking?
We were pleased we got that far and got that close. But the frustration was the number of places we didn't gain by just a few votes, which would have put us into hung parliament territory. We would have had a minority Labour government. And the frustration of the party not putting resources into some marginals it could have done. The number of places we just missed gaining in Scotland by a handful of votes and that sort of thing. So there was the frustration of that. But I felt that we had at least proved that you could put forward a coherent, well-prepared, well-presented manifesto that would fundamentally improve the lives of the majority of the population, and it got a hearing. I was proud of that achievement.
So then fast forward to
2019.
2 years. What were you picking up as you went around then?
First of all, a winter election is a totally different atmosphere. 2017 was a totally outdoor, open-air thing, and I was on the streets, in the parks and all that, all the time. 2019 was very much cold weather, wet days, quite a lot of indoor things, quite a few outdoor rallies, but some of them were pretty cold, and you had to shorten the speeches and so on. Johnson had this very straightforward message, get Brexit done. Ours was a more complicated one because basically there were two views in the party. There was the second referendum Remain group, and there was those that represented Leave seats who felt we had to go on it. And so we agreed unanimously at the Trade Union Labour Organisation thing at conference and meeting at conference and in the shadow cabinet and so on, that we would put forward the policy we did, which was negotiate and then offer the results of the negotiation in a referendum. Was it a mistake? It was a big mistake made by a lot of people if it was a mistake. It was my attempt to try and bring people together. Clearly it didn't work.
Which side of those two did you have most sympathy with? The second referendum people or that we got to go with this?
My sympathies were with having a sensible agreement with the European Union, which I had outlined, negotiated with Barnier anyway, on the idea of a bespoke customs union. Initially, the EU were totally hostile to it. And I said, look, you know, if Britain is not in the European Union, do you really want the Tory option of an offshore island doing business with the USA undermining Europe, or do you want an agreement with yourselves in which there will be a trading relationship with Europe? And I felt we were capable of getting that. We tried to turn the election campaign into the general social, economic, social justice issues. It was very hard to get past the simplicity of Johnson's message, the media attacks on me, and the way in which, I mean, Johnson went hiding in a fridge one day, and that's treated as a plus by the media, as a sort of bit of a joke, you know, and which I thought was, well, this is what we're up against with some of the media in this country. And when we exposed the secret negotiations with the US over healthcare, Dominic Cummings said that was the strong moment for Labour, and he felt that our campaign could become very dangerous for the Tories from that point on. So it was quite important for the Tories to be able to lean on the right-wing media to completely rubbish the allegations I'd made. Where was I wrong?
But then comes the vote. It's as bad a result as you could expect. Now, you got the same media as you did in 2017. The electorate can't be that much different. So what do you think happened?
Well, simplicity of the Tory message, it was a lower turnout. We went down to 32.5% of the vote, which weirdly would have won us the 2005 and other elections, but in this one was a disaster because of the loss of seats. I think it was probably more than anything the Brexit position, which people who had voted leave in the referendum felt that it was being revisited by the party. Now, as I said many times, the issues in this country and in Europe are the class divisions and the poverty of people. If you voted leave and you're living on universal credit in a private rented flat, you're up against it. If you voted remain and you're living in the same circumstances, you're equally up against it. What you need is a transformative government.
Arguably, they got one of those.
It did, but it didn't transform in that direction.
No. Yeah. And so I'm wondering now, this is a party that you have been in all your life, all your adult life, and that you've actually dedicated a significant part of your working life to. They've withdrawn the whip. This seat that you've represented for 40 years, they've said you shouldn't represent next time. How do you feel about that, and what are you going to do about it?
I don't want to put the whole thing in personal terms because that's not my style of politics and doing things. But if I did, I think I'd be entitled to feel very hurt by the way an individual has been treated. But it's more important. It's the way a community has been treated. I've been elected 10 times to represent Islington North. I've been reselected on every one of those occasions by the local party. I live in the area and I work for the area. If people of North Islington don't want me, that's their choice. But they're not going to get that choice if we carry on with this approach by the Labour Party. And so very recently, the Islington North delegate body, representative of the entire party membership, voted by 60 to 1 abstention that first of all, a very nice message of thanks to me to commemorate this first 40 years, and at the same time said that the members of Islington North should have a say in who the candidate should be. The Labour Party cannot turn its head on its own democracy and its own representative nature. And it's not just Islington North. Copeland Party the other day, the executive and the selection committee resigned. That's happened in other constituencies as well because they don't like the way in which regional officials of the party are being told to impose candidates. At the end of the day, it weakens everybody. Democracy is complicated, it's difficult, it's not easy, but at the end of the day, it's much stronger, which is what I was trying to do in the party, develop the democratic voice of party members.
So then what do you think this is about?
I think it's about the political changes that the right of the party have never wanted. They never wanted the anti-austerity position. They wanted management of the economy. Whereas my argument is we have a grotesquely imbalanced society, more billionaires than ever, more millionaires than ever, and we have more poverty than I can remember in my lifetime. Food banks everywhere, more than branches of McDonald's, and a government that is promoting greater inequality in society. We've got to be offering something different. Sadly, at the moment, we're not.
Do you plan to stand?
I'm going to be around.
You're going to be around?
I'm going to be around.
Is that the same as standing or not the same?
I'm going to be around.
Okay. If we bookend those 40 years, because I think it's quite interesting, you come in 81, there's been the uprisings in Brixton and Moss Side and Toxteth and elsewhere. There'd been the hunger strikes in Ireland. There was a huge foment kind of taking place. Fast forward to 2023, We've had more strikes. We have Sinn Féin as the largest party in Northern Ireland. We've had Black Lives Matter and all that that has represented. I'm wondering how this moment to you compares with the moment when you came in.
It's always a bit risky to say history repeats itself because it's never exactly the same.
Well, I think it's Mark Twain who said sometimes it rhymes.
It rhymes. I think that's a good way of putting it. 81 period, there were the riots in Brixton, Wood Green. Take a stage before that, there was the very significant and serious growth of an anti-racist movement in the 1970s. The National Front in London in, I think it was 1977, thereabouts, got 100,000 votes across London in a GLC election. Huge. I was there with anti-racist movement at the time, and with Bernie we organised a huge demonstration in Wood Green to try and stop the fascists marching through, and I joined in with all the others. And we then had the uprising in Brixton and so on later on. We also had the issues of Ireland. And now I came into Parliament saying there had to be talks with Sinn Féin. There had to be talks to bring about an end to the troubles, the war was going on in Northern Ireland. I was condemned by everybody for inviting Gerry Adams to come into Parliament to meet MPs. I mean, he could have come in as an elected member, but he wouldn't take his seat for reasons of, Democrat takes seats in the British Parliament. I was condemned all the time on all that, and condemned for supporting the Birmingham Six and Guildford Four. The Birmingham Six were released, the Guildford Four were released. A peace process happened in Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin are now the largest party in Northern Ireland. And sometimes you've got to stand up and say things, even if it makes you quite unpopular at the time. But I think making those stances is important, and that's what I've always done, and that's what I will continue to do. So does it repeat itself exactly? No. But I do think the industrial disputes now, postal, railway, civil service, teachers, and so on, are different. The workforces are younger, they're more diverse. A lot of people are joining unions for the first time, 60,000 extra members in a teachers' union, for example. And the issues that come up on the picket line and the demonstrations are not just industrial, they're also about housing, they're also about poverty, there are lots of other things as well. So we're moving into a fluid political time. What I'm finding is lots of people who joined our campaign in 2017 are now active in all these campaigns.
Last question, I think. You talk about the offer that's being made at the moment by the party, so it's insufficient, but they're doing quite well in the polls. They could still win. I, for a moment, will be the alter ego and say, well, Jeremy, you're the man that led us to inglorious defeat in 2019, and here we are, back again, on top with a sensible agenda that can get us back into Parliament and make people's lives better.
Look, I want to see this Tory government defeated as much or more than anybody else, but I also want to make sure that in defeating them, we actually bring a real alternative. Wage levels rising, housing crisis addressed and dealt with, no private sector interest, involvement or control of our National Health Service, National Care Service. There's too much trimming going on in every one of those areas. To excite people, you have to offer an alternative. And I think we are riding on an anti-Tory wave at the moment. Good, that's good, but it only gets you so far.
Thank you. Independent media is vital, it's important. The news we get, the perspectives we hear are filtered through people with large amounts of money. Well, Double Down News doesn't have large amounts of money, it's patron funded. Fund them so we can get a diversity of perspectives. Join Double Down News on Patreon.